Well, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kim. My name is Jin Park, as was introduced. I'm the moderator of this morning session. We have had two speeches this morning from Minister Cho and President Yu of Korea Foundation, which is a good preparation for our discussion. We have six very distinguished presenters and panelists this morning who would like to talk about three questions in my view. Who are the middle powers? What is the definition of middle power? And what can they do? How do we exercise this public diplomacy for the public common good? These are the main questions that we have in mind to proceed with our discussion this morning. Let me introduce four presenters, distinguished presenters, and two panelists. First, we have Dr. Cha Du-hyeon, Dr. Cha, on my left here, who is the Executive Vice President of Korea Foundation. And he was also Research Fellow at Korea Institute of Defense Analysis for more than 20 years. And his area of specialty is national defense, security, and also North Korean studies. And in his capacity as a security specialist, he has been engaged in many research activities on public diplomacy. So ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Cha Du-hyeon, please give him a big round of applause. And we have, if I can introduce all the presenters, Professor A10 Gilboa from Israel, from the Middle East, who is a professor at the School of Communication at Bar-Ilan University. And he is a renowned expert on international communication and public diplomacy. He has been teaching at the university for a long time, and he was a director of the School of Communication and also Center for International Communication as well. He's also visiting professor of public diplomacy at the University of Southern California, USC, where he helped to establish the Center on Public Diplomacy. So we have Professor Eytan Gilboa. Would you like to give him a big round of applause? And we have the incumbent ambassador from Australia, who has recently arrived in Korea to serve as an ambassador from Australia. He has been responsible for working on counterterrorism and international strategic and security policy, and political and military affairs, intelligence, and regional issues in the Australian government. He was ambassador to Thailand previously, and also he led Australia's disaster relief response to the 2004 Asian tsunami. So we have Ambassador William Paterson. Ladies and gentlemen, William Paterson. And then we have another distinguished presenter from Asia, this time Indonesia. Rizal SUKMA is executive director of the CSIS, Center for Strategic and International Studies in Jakarta. Rizal SUKMA is chairman of international relations and also member of the board of advisors of the Institute for Peace and Democracy. And he studied in London, the London School of Economics and Political Science, and has worked extensively on many issues such as security in Southeast Asia, ASEAN affairs, the Indonesian foreign and defense policy and military reform, and so on. So Rizal SUKMA, ladies and gentlemen. Personally, I had a very good conversation with him in Jakarta this year by attending the CSIS seminar on Korea-Indonesian partnership, and I would like to tell you it was a very important, productive discussion. And we have two prominent scholars and practitioners. We have Secretary General of the Danish Cultural Institute, whose name is Mr. Finn Andersen. Mr. Finn Andersen has been Secretary General of the Danish Cultural Institute in Copenhagen. And before, he was Country Director of the Danish Cultural Institute in Britain and Ireland, based in Edinburgh. And also he has been external examiner at the universities and business schools in Denmark. He was also an adjunct professor in international studies at Aalborg University. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Finn Andersen. Last but not least, we have Professor Philip Zip, who is a professor of journalism and public diplomacy at the University of Southern California. He was a director of the Center on Public Diplomacy, which, as I have mentioned, Professor A10 Gilboa has contributed to establish the center. So I guess two of you might be very good friends with each other, working in the same area. Professor Philip Zip has written many books, including Headline Diplomacy, regarding the media, the role of media in international relations, which affect foreign policy, and also the Middle Eastern Media Communication Group, as you know, Al Jazeera, the effect of this Al Jazeera on the global issues, global terrorism, and the new media, and so on. So we have Professor Philip Zip, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I have got 2 hours and 5 minutes, so I'd like to use it very efficiently by starting with Professor Dr. Cha's presentation on the role of middle power in public diplomacy. Dr. Cha.
Thank you, Honorable Dr. Pa. Before starting my presentation, I would like to say it's my great privilege and honor to meet and discuss with such a prominent and distinguished experts and practitioners and scholars on the issue of middle power's role of public diplomacy. The main point of my presentation is middle powers can take a role of a bridge that link people to people, culture to culture, as well as the government to government, state to state, through a loose but very collaborative network, like that of Gentleman's Club. Someone say that, why this time the role of middle powers should be emerged, and how, what should or can they do that? For that reason, I would like to refer the fact that transforming world and power transitions in the 21st century. As all of us know, there took place 3 major trends: informationization, globalization, and democratization had taken place, and they have inevitably induced a power transition from government to civil society, and from state under Westphalian sovereignty to global and local network of knowledge, and from hard power to soft power. In this circumstance, a single husband of balance of power system cannot manage all of the complex and difficult issues that need to be resolved. So, countries have to find the method of survival and prosperity in a more collaborative and cooperative manner rather than contending national interests. We also have to refer the fact that there are so many common issues to resolve and the emerging threats beyond the boundaries. We have many global issues that remain unresolved despite their enormous efforts. As time progresses, they will only increase. Most of them demand internationally collaborative assessment and countermeasures. For example, there are some. We are all the same interest, and we share the similar goal for handling the global financial crisis and the establishment of global governance system and the world's sustainable development. We should also be concerned about emerging issues that need cooperative and common approaches among countries, such as urbanization, migration, and the multicultural society, acceleration of an aging society, cybersecurity, and generation gap, and so on. So countries also have to take into account transnational and non-traditional threats, such as narco-trafficking and international crime, weaponization of resources, and threat to major sea lanes that have emerged since the end of the 20th century but now especially prominent. Despite these many emerging issues, initiating cooperative approaches among superpowers is not so easy because of deep-rooted distrust and heterogeneity while avoiding direct conflict. It has been also difficult to initiate collaboration between superpowers and smaller powers. As all of us know, there are so many different viewpoints on various issues that are difficult to compromise, such as origin, related responsibility, level of contribution, and so on. So, the need for bridging the gap between the superpowers and the weaker countries is becoming more and more important. And then I would like to point out that what's the typical way or behavior that the middle powers should take. We should go beyond the traditional definition of public diplomacy based on the national interest. Although there is no agreed definition on the term of middle power, we can identify the common or popular credos of middle powers. It's not seeking hegemony and advocating multilateral cooperation rather than competition among groups or blocs, pursuing consensus of collaboration rather than unilateral or majority decision or coercion. And middle powers also should emphasize international, regional norms and morality, and have to promote creativity rather than maintaining conventional wisdom. If middle powers can take truly meaningful roles in international relations, they should consider continuous evolution, such as refraining from seeking short-term selfish national interest, or obtaining the trust of weaker powers as a role model, as well as from trust of superpowers as a mirror of morality. Superpowers also can establish exemplary political, economical, and social system, and think and act beyond the territorial borders. Through all of these efforts, middle powers can expand cooperation with civil societies, not only at the domestic level, but also regional and international level. In this regard, the concept of public diplomacy among middle powers should be differentiated from that of superpowers or major powers. The public diplomacy of middle power countries should not merely aim for exclusive privilege or brand powers, but realize the need for a common good. And the public diplomacy of middle power should be allowed sympathy should allow sympathy among nations and peoples rather than coercing others, so to speak, trying not to take on the mask of a superpower. I don't say that middle powers is free from the national interest. There's no country that can do that. But in a short term, the emphasis on the public diplomacy, not for the national interest, but for the public goods or international goods, in the short term, it is not so beneficial. But in medium and long term, the reputation and the trust of other countries and the brand images of their country can sharply increase. Yes, while thinking others, they also can thinking themselves. And the middle powers, public diplomacy can be a channel for mutual understanding and trust among them, as well as with other powers. Through the cooperation in public diplomacy, middle powers will be able to expand the shared values that are common morality and ultimately establish a world code of common sense. And the middle power countries can act cooperatively in agenda setting in the international issues. It does not mean that the middle powers make another exclusive group or that have seek their own selfish interest. But they have to make a network for cooperation and collaboration, and then promoting the cooperation among all the global countries. Finally, I would like to say how we can build an architecture for sustainable cooperation. For enhancing and expanding the cooperation in public diplomacy among middle powers, we need to establish a network for continuous deliberation. It is not necessarily governmental level meeting. It's sufficient in an initial stage, 1.5 or 2-track dialogues and subsequent networking. And for continuous cooperation, we also try to cooperate with distinguished public organizations or NGOs. In the case of the Korea Foundation, we have made various efforts toward networking by already launching the Korean Network for International Exchange in October of this year for domestic cooperation and collaboration. And this Korea Foundation Global Seminar, we think, will be a starting point for such networking at the international level. And I propose we can start with cooperative countries first. We are gathering all of the middle powers together in the initial stage is neither possible nor desirable. The middle powers that share visions and values can make a small groups of colleagues. This principle can be applied in cooperation or in various fields and various activities. But as I already mentioned, we are not pursuing a closed and exclusive membership. Basically, this type of network or mechanism will be open to all the middle powers that can share the values and the morals and the goals. So we is sufficient to the loose network, loose but cooperative network among the middle powers that has a capability, willingness, and existence of vision. I do believe that at the starting point, it is merely a small building block. But in the long run, it can be a great skyscraper to lead toward the more peaceful and collaborative world. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you, Dr. Cha. Thank you for providing us with some food for thought about middle power and the public diplomacy. Dr. Cha has pointed out that public diplomacy will be exercised beyond national borders through multilateral cooperation, working with civil societies, and to pursue sustainable cooperation. And he made an example of MITCA, the 5-country informal consultative group, which is open, there's open membership and low threshold. So let me move to the next presenter, who is from the Middle East, Israel. I'll give you 10 minutes, as I have given to Dr. Cha. After 10 minutes, my glass bell will ring. So, Professor A10 Gilboa. Thank you.
Good morning. I would like to thank the Korean Foundation for the invitation to participate in this conference. This is my second appearance for the Korean Foundation, and I'm very happy to be here. I would like to praise the Korean Foundation for conducting this conference. I'm doing research on comparative public diplomacy, and I'm very interested in ways countries evaluate their existing programs and plan future ones. And I think this is one of the best models of doing both evaluation and planning. I also would like to recognize here the presence of Ambassador Ma, a brilliant public diplomacy expert who is doing a great job for Korea. I am a theoretician of public diplomacy, but in this particular area, you cannot develop theory without sufficient evidence from the field itself, and therefore I'm very interested in practice as well. There are many questions about the usefulness of the concept middle power. And I have wasted a few months of researching it, and I've written an article where I'm spending a few pages thus just about the term. What we can say, or what I'm saying about middle powers is this. Number one, middle powers usually have much more influence than their resources. And secondly, perhaps from a negative perspective, middle powers force the superpowers to do things that otherwise they would not do. So we have the combination of these two types of influences. This is a typical graphic description of what a middle power could be. This is the Cold War. You see Kennedy versus Khrushchev, and here on the right you see Canadian foreign minister at the time, John Diefenbaker, with the UN flag, trying to separate them apart. These are the theoretical issues that we need to discuss. Why successful public diplomacy is critical for middle powers. Is the public diplomacy of middle powers different from that of superpowers and states? How middle powers contribute to public diplomacy theory and practice? I have only a few minutes, so I'll be only touching on those issues. My main argument is this. As I said earlier, middle powers, limited resources, much more influence in international relations. I think that to be a middle power, you need substantial soft power assets and effective utilization of public diplomacy based on those soft power assets. I'm arguing that often the difference between being a middle power and just a regular state is public diplomacy. This makes the difference between middle powers and perhaps other states. What is power in the information age? Nations' capacity to create and manipulate knowledge and information. We talk today about three kinds of power. Hard power, everybody knows that. Soft power and smart power. But smart power, what is smart power? Smart power is not just the integration of hard power and soft power, which many people refer to. It's an integration of those two types of power so that they effectively advance the actor's goals via mutual reinforcing. That's the basic idea here. What is the nature of power? It's always comparative. It's you and somebody else. It's always relative, because you can be stronger from one country and weaker from another, and it's always perceived it in the mind of people rather than anything else. So you can see here on the right. What is the middle? We know superpowers, and we know states, and even failed states. So it's in between. So typical definition, trivial definition is this. I'm quoting from someone. A middle power is a state that is neither a great power, not a small power. Well, you could have a wide range of countries in between. So this is not a satisfactory definition. But so we need, in order to know the middle, we need to know the high category and also the low category. And this is certainly not an easy thing to do. This is an attempt to calculate hard power. I cannot go into this in details, but if you apply this formulation, which was developed many years ago by the CIA by a person by the name of Ray Klein, you have hard elements on the left, such as territory and population and GDP and conventional versus nuclear materials. But then you multiply it by soft elements. Here we have, like soft elements, strategic power and will. This was added after Vietnam, strategic power and will. But you see, here you give values from 1 to 10, here only from 0.0 to 1.0. So in the past, if you were to apply this formula, you will get a number of states in the middle, but we know that today this is not a good formula. What we can say about middle powers in terms of theory, number one, they have to lead. They have to lead something. They cannot be just behind. Although I'm hearing that Obama is leading behind. I don't know what is to lead behind. Either you lead or you are behind. So you have to lead. So this is one element. Second, you have to have assets. Mostly soft power assets. Third, you deal with certain issues that are more useful and more interesting for middle powers. And third, you always do it with partners. Only the superpowers, and even today, this may be true, only superpowers can do whatever they want. And it turns out that even for the United States, the greatest superpower, this might not be possible in many situations. But for middle powers, you always have to work together with others. In terms of assets, Joe Nye, who invented soft power, talked about institutions, values, culture, and foreign policy. That's not enough. So I think that here we have an attempt by the London Institute for Government. They suggest to look at 5 different categories of soft power: assets, business, culture, government, diplomacy, and education. We can also see, this is another attempt by Simon Anholt, who invented the idea of nation branding. We see similar categories here: people, tourism, exports, governance, investment, and immigration, culture and heritage. All these are categories of soft power. Incidentally, this is for 2012. They calculated soft power assets for 30 countries. Korea is number 14. And over time, the position of Korea has been improving. I cannot go into details, I have reservations about it, but this is an attempt to calculate soft power assets and rank order different countries. This is another attempt to do a soft power index. It's from 0 to 1. It's based on public opinion polls, and you can see South Korea is on the right, which shows that it has the most respect in Vietnam of some places, of all places, and the next place is China. So this is evaluation of soft power assets as seen by other countries. So this is nation branding for Korea. And if you look at it, then the question is, what is the essence of nation branding for Korea? What you see here is like a big mix that has to be focused on some specific area. The issues that middle powers are dealing with, we distinguish among three types of agenda. First agenda, world security. For middle powers, with the exception of conflict resolution and peacekeeping forces. The second is economic development and foreign aid. Typical issue for middle powers. This is where they have to distinguish themselves from other countries. And the third agenda, human rights, human security, human rights, climate change, and health. These are the issues which middle powers work on. When we manage public diplomacy, we have to look at the following issues. We need to look at challenges, strategies, priorities, contents, instruments, programs, coordination, supervision, feedback, and evaluation. For middle powers, this formula, which I have developed for planning purposes, is critical. Because if the purpose is to be a middle power, a certain answer must be given to all of these planning issues. This is my own instrumental approach to public diplomacy. I've identified, I think, 15 different instruments of public diplomacy. All of them are being pursued by middle powers with somewhat different emphasis. But for me, in order for public diplomacy program to be efficient, especially for middle powers, there must be a need to consider all of these instruments in one strategic plan. And public diplomacy for me, it's not just cultural diplomacy, it's much more than that, as you can see with the different instruments here. My time is up. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Sure. Well, thank you, Professor A10 Gilboa. Thank you for being very punctual. I almost tried to ring my bell, but you just wound up. This is a very interesting presentation. In my view, you have elaborated on the components of the middle power diplomacy and the different approaches, including the complex equation about what constitutes middle power. I think one of the most important points that Professor Eytan Gilboa has pointed out is that the middle power requires leadership, assets, issues, and partners. Now, certainly, I think these are very important elements of exercising middle power. You mentioned nation branding, and Korea has always been known as a land of the morning calm. That was the name of our nation, but now it's a dynamic Korea. So people say we are the nation, land of the morning busy and evening crazy. So let me move on to the third presenter, Ambassador William Paterson from Australia. Ambassador.
Well, thank you, Chairman Park, and thank you to the Korea Foundation for doing me the honour of inviting me here today. I propose to, in contrast to the Professor's presentation, to offer a governmental approach to middle power collaboration with other middle powers. Some of my colleagues from Canberra who are responsible for the development of our middle power policy are here with me today. I haven't cleared what I'm going to say with them, but they'll be staying on to correct me after I've left. I've noticed, reading some of the literature since I've been in Korea, that middle power status has been something of a preoccupation for some in Korea, and indeed for other self-described middle powers for some years. But today I wanted to address the evolution of a middle power consultative forum, MICTA, which has only recently just held its first meeting. But perhaps to go back quickly, what constitutes a middle power? Let me just offer some non-prescriptive thoughts. I think obviously economic weight. Political power, I think, derives from a combination, of course, of soft power, as the Professor mentioned, but also from economic and military substance, and deriving from that capability. Middle power status also involves a readiness to engage internationally and actively to lead in support both of national interests, but also issues related to global order. It also, I think, requires membership of, but more importantly, contribution to, not only the UN, the WTO, and other regional and multilateral bodies. It requires, to be credible, I think, values and institutions underpinning this, which lend credibility to advocacy and present attractive models, what Professor might describe as soft power assets. Normally, middle power status would probably require, I think, liberal and open societies and to be probably significant trading nations. National capability has to be there. Political leadership, diplomatic skills, and a diplomatic network if this is to be used internationally. Why do both Australia and Korea fit into that? I think both countries meet all those criteria. In terms of GDP, Australia ranks 12th in the world and Korea ranks 15th. Both countries are active, for instance, as providers of development assistance, and both contribute to UN peacekeeping operations. Both are members of the G20, the OECD, APEC, EAS, and are partners right here in Korea in the Global Green Growth Institute. Both are currently non-permanent members of the United Nations Security Council because they want to make a broader international contribution. We share broad areas of agreement across the international agenda, things like a commitment to nuclear non-proliferation and to disarmament, to human rights, and to a rules-based international order. We have always been out there active. We conceived APEC and the Cairns Group. We were instrumental in the Cambodia peace settlement and the birth of Timor-Leste, practical and constructive middle power activity. Both Australia and Korea are active in the East Asia Summit process and APEC, but with key national interests and engagement that extend to the Middle East and beyond. But neither of us has a natural constituency such as the EU or ASEAN to support us. And finally, I think both of us are attractive soft power and smart power models, but in quite different ways. I might just talk a little bit about the thinking behind the Pivotal Powers or Middle Powers initiative. What sort of principles? Why has the time come for such a grouping? Well, the international order is changing. We're living in a period of great flux. Power centres have become more numerous and more diffuse. There are new consequential players like China, India and Brazil gaining increasing power and authority, while many established powers, the US, EU and Japan, are experiencing extended periods of slower growth. And non-state actors, as well as cross-border impacts of information technology, have also impacted on the roles of nation states. So the picture is changing very rapidly. Regional powers like Australia, Indonesia, the Republic of Korea, Mexico and Turkey are also gaining new prominence. We believe amongst those ones I've just listed, there are some shared interests and challenges. Our interests are converging. We share a common experience of navigating between our strong relationships with the established powers and our growing and economic and trade ties to the emerging major powers. We face similar challenges, many of them new and requiring new ways of thinking, promoting the stability and prosperity of our regions and tackling global issues, including climate change and non-traditional security problems, transnational crime, unregulated people movements, food and energy security and cyber security. And we share, as I said earlier, a core interest in safeguarding a predictable rules-based international order and promoting constructive multilateral activity. So a global approach is essential to tackling many of the challenges we face, but the international environment at the same time is becoming more contested. The practices and principles underpinning the international order are coming under challenge. It's becoming harder to achieve results through multilateralism. Effective multilateral organisations also ensure smaller states and middle powers like Australia and Korea retain a strong voice on issues that matter to us and provide an opportunity for established and emerging powers to come together to resolve differences in a constructive way. We can benefit from consulting more as a group, we believe, leveraging our economic complementarities and our shared strategic interests. We can discuss ways to strengthen regional institutions and multilateral organisations like the UN, particularly the UN Security Council, the G20, the WTO, and to use our established relationships with the bigger powers and emerging powers and a reputation as honest brokers to help build consensus with these organisations. We believe in this MICTA group that has now had its first meeting, a rather ideal combination which we're approaching with a spirit of inclusiveness. It is not our intention, nor that I think of any of the other participants in this group, to create an exclusive non-G7, non-BRICS bloc. This would create an unhelpful dynamic. We should not aim to agree joint positions necessarily in advance of international forums, but our aim is to share ideas, to identify innovative solutions to existing challenges we should support, and if that's the case, we should promote through our own regional and international networks. It is there, I think, that we can take this process beyond what my colleague Rizal SUKMA described, I think, in the Jakarta Post, as take this process beyond chit-chat. We should aim to build this in an incremental manner, taking a gradual approach to build confidence among the participants and to reassure other states about the constructive and inclusive nature of this initiative. Well, the 5 foreign ministers of Mexico, Indonesia, Korea, Turkey and Australia carried this forward and met on the margins for the first time as a group, met on the margins of the UN in New York on 26 September. They agreed they should aim to have regular informal meetings between middle powers foreign ministers, and the format of the meeting should continue to be informal, something like a lunch or dinner discussion, a meeting on the side of another meeting, to create the right environment for an informal and free exchange of views. What should they discuss? Some broad topics could be proposed. I think broad themes might be the role of middle powers in promoting multilateralism, the working methods of the United Nations Security Council. Are there better ways to be doing things? But within a framework of supporting the UN and embedding the G20 in international architecture. As you know, Australia will host the G20 in Australia next year. Korea, of course, hosted it here in 2010. Our aim should be to support regional stability and prosperity through closing development gaps and enhancing the effectiveness of regional institutions. The group might also look at ways in which we could catalyse work on global challenges like building a consensus on approaches to climate change, non-traditional security problems, as I mentioned before, such as the whole transnational crime agenda would be one area. Also food security and, importantly, cyber security. Foreign ministers may develop over time some broad principles for middle power cooperation, how in fact their considerable joint persuasive power can best be deployed. They could agree on next steps to carry this forward and either separately or jointly pursue them in other forums. In the shortage of time, I might just move on to say that we don't see this as an exclusive block. Australia sees this as a flexible mechanism and one that we certainly would be open to including other countries in this initiative in the future, where they're like-minded and where they would add value. But process and membership really are less important than common approaches and demonstrating value. But the MICTA group, I think, has shown a commonality of view, a commonality of purpose, and in fact the right people at the right time to carry this forward. But the idea of including others in discussions on particular issues has been raised, and we certainly see merit in this as a way of building consensus around solutions to particular challenges and emphasising the inclusive nature of this initiative. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ambassador, for explaining the process of the middle power diplomacy, which is now in evolving process, and also